The NFL Draft has long served as a beacon of hope for some of the long-suffering NFL fans who, on one fateful day many years before, blindly pledged their allegiance to one of the league's less impressive franchises and never looked back. I'm talking the real diehards, the Dawg Pound in Cleveland, the Bucs fans, Jets fans. Any fan who follows a team that's most exciting moment year in and year out comes when they are picking at the top of the draft, yet again. They say, hope springs eternal. But in the case of the NFL Draft, it is still a very real possibility that even some of the most highly anticipated draft picks don't live up to expectations in the league. As the former Green Bay Packers general manager, Ron Wolf, said, until he puts on your uniform, you really don't know. Sometimes, the player is just not the right fit. Like when Jared Goff looked inept after being drafted into Jeff Fisher's system. Other times, the player in question's draft stock had rocketed higher than it ever should have, and maybe the team that took him reached a little bit, either because of a celebrated season in the college ranks or an impressive showing at the combine. Unfortunately, the misses are unavoidable. And while I would love to crucify some of the NFL's constant bottom dwellers for their continued ineptitude, there have been some instances where even the worst of the worst NFL execs should not have expected to shoulder all of the blame for the pitiful haul that their team ended up with in the draft. Because, for whatever reason, that year's draft class ended up being completely devoid of talent. Now, in saying that, I don't mean that these bad drafts don't have playable players, but when you're picking in the first half of the draft, you expect more than playable. You expect Pro Bowl talent at the very least. And if you're picking in the top 10 or 5, then we're talking all pros and potential Hall of Famers. Otherwise, the selection is seen as a miss, even if the player goes on to have a nice career in the league. But like I said, there are some draft classes that, for whatever reason, just don't produce top talent, no matter where you pick. Like in 2013, which flopped in a big way after the star-studded 2012 draft class. Think about this, 8 of the top 12 picks are not even with the team that drafted them, indicating that they weren't exactly a treasured asset in their respective organizations. It gets worse too. There were only 3 players in the top 10 to make it to a Pro Bowl: Ezekiel Ansah, Eric Fisher, and Lane Johnson. Talk about a disappointing draft class. But as underwhelming as the 2013 class was, there is one draft class that stands alone as the single worst draft class of all time. A class so utterly disappointing that less than half of the first round picks and just 26 players in total earned a trip to the Pro Bowl during their careers. And there was not a single player in the entire draft that made it to Canton. I'd almost go as far as saying that it makes the 2013 draft look like 83. Not only did this draft lack any star power, but it featured some big-time college names that busted in a big way. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Let's take a deep dive into the 1992 NFL Draft, the draft with 0 Hall of Famers that is widely considered to be the worst draft in NFL history. For the first time since 1958, the same team held the first 2 overall picks, so there was a burgeoning belief that the Indianapolis Colts might soon be on the upswing after their disastrous 1-15 season in '91. I mean, come on. Having the top 2 overall picks? Surely Indy would be able to at least trip and fall into some elite NFL talent, right? Well, unfortunately for the Colts, they were 0 for 2, striking out on both of their first 2 picks. Number 1 overall, they took defensive lineman Steve Entman, who played just 3 seasons for the Colts. And second, it was linebacker Quentin Coryatt, who recorded 0 tackles his rookie season and never really turned into the star that they had been promised. The number 1 and number 2 overall picks went on to combine for exactly 0 Pro Bowl appearances and just 16.5 sacks between the 2 of them in their entire NFL careers. Not to mention the fact that both players were also out of the league before turning 30. So much for that epic rebuild that Indy was supposed to have in store. The sad part is that the draft really didn't get much better from there. One of the storylines that all of the draft analysts and draft experts around the country key in on every year is which teams were in the market for a new franchise quarterback, and conversely, what the consensus is on the top signal callers of that particular year's draft class. Does it have the next Peyton Manning or the next Ryan Leaf? Heading into the draft, there were 2 eligible quarterbacks whose names dominated the sports talk airways. David Klinger out of the University of Houston and the UCLA product Tommy Maddox. 2 guys that fit the mold: tall, big arm, and an accomplished collegiate career. At Houston, Klinger lit up the scoreboard in an early adaptation of their air raid offense, setting all sorts of NCAA records and shredding defenses all the way to a Heisman Trophy finalist. Maddox was doing much of the same at UCLA, becoming the first Pac-10 player to pass for 5,000 yards by his sophomore season and earning first-team All-American honors in '91. All the way up until the draft, experts toggled back and forth over who would be the first quarterback off the board. As it turns out, Klinger was the first to go, taken number 6 overall by the Cincinnati Bengals. Then Maddox followed, going 25th overall to the Broncos. And just like he technically entered the league first, Klinger was also out of the league first, retiring at the age of 28 after 18 touchdowns and 22 interceptions in a largely uneventful 6 seasons. Maddox, on the other hand, was drafted to the Denver Broncos in a confusing pick, considering they still had John Elway and all. Maddox didn't play much during his 2 seasons in Denver, and the Broncos decided to trade him to the Rams just before the '94 season, netting a 4th rounder for him. Even with the change of scenery, Maddox had a tough time finding an opportunity to play, and served as a backup until he stepped away from football in 1997. During his hiatus, he worked as an All-State agent, but remained active, eventually returning to football to play in the Arena Football League for a season, then the XFL the following year. Maddox parlayed his time in those leagues into a second chance at the NFL with the Steelers, and he put together a nice little stretch to close out his career. But when you take a quarterback in the first round, you definitely don't want to be hearing words like XFL or All-State mentioned with their name. I say all this to say, just like the rest of this godforsaken draft, the quarterbacks taken left much to be desired. Another storyline that we tend to see in the lead-up to just about every NFL draft is where the reigning Heisman Trophy winner will go. Obviously, there are situations where the Heisman winners aren't yet eligible for the NFL draft, like when Johnny Manziel won as a freshman or when Tim Tebow won as a sophomore. But those are few and far between. And when the Heisman Trophy winner declares, that alone becomes a spectacle. And the '92 is no exception, when Michigan star Desmond Howard announced that he was set to leave after 3 conference titles and 2 Rose Bowls. Ann Arbor fans and experts alike were keen to see where he would end up. Howard was a dynamic wide receiver in college, and more famously, a deadly return specialist, hauling in 134 receptions for 2,146 yards and 32 touchdowns, and setting the school record for most single-season touchdowns, with 23 of them coming in his junior year. NFL teams were licking their chops, thinking that adding a guy with his playmaking ability would be a real difference maker for their organization. In fact, the Redskins were so excited by the thought of adding Howard to their roster that they traded 2 first-rounders and a 3rd-rounder to the Bengals to jump up to 4th overall, fearing the rumors that Green Bay wanted the Heisman Trophy winner at 5. Head coach Joe Gibbs was smitten with Howard, telling the New York Times, "When you're drafting that high, you're looking for a potentially great player. This guy doesn't have any flaws. We're excited." Well, unfortunately for the Redskins, they were not immune to the sweeping disappointment that was the '92 draft class, as Howard's big playability didn't really translate to the NFL level, especially not as a receiver. I mean, the Redskins didn't even protect him during the '95 expansion draft. All of the accolades Howard earned in the NFL were from his performance on special teams, which, while important, is not exactly what you were expecting when you trade up to take the Heisman Trophy winner 4th overall. From top to bottom, the '92 draft is littered with these stories of disappointment. There was tight end Derek Brown, who was taken 14th overall by the Giants and recorded his 43 catches for 401 yards and a single touchdown during his mediocre 8-year career. Then, there was touchdown Tommy Vardell, the fullback that the Browns took number 9 overall. Imagine that, a fullback going 9th overall. During his time at Stanford, he was a standout, setting the school record for rushing yards, notching 1,084 yards in a single season and punching in 37 touchdowns during his collegiate career. But again, his skill set didn't really translate to the NFL level, and he totaled only 1,427 yards and 18 touchdowns throughout 8 seasons. The stories are countless. Atlanta took Tony Smith 19th overall, a running back who would compile just 329 yards and 2 touchdowns during his short NFL career. Von Dunbar, the consensus All-American and Jim Brown Award recipient that the Saints took 21st overall. lasted just 3 seasons in the league. The 18th pick overall, Dana Hall, the safety out of Washington, went to the 49ers, where he kept his starting job for exactly 1 season. In fact, during his 6-year NFL career, Hall started just 38 games, and 15 of them were during his rookie year. That's not to say there weren't any talented players to come out of this draft class. Sean Gilbert, who went 3rd overall to the Rams, made an all-pro team, and Chester McLaughlin, the defensive end out of Clemson who went 16th to the Raiders, had a stretch where he was selected to 3 consecutive all-pro teams and 4 consecutive Pro Bowls. But as far as true star power, well, the 92 draft had none of it, which is evident considering its lack of representation in the NFL Hall of Fame. Although there wasn't necessarily a direct correlation, it is rather symbolic that after the 1992 draft, the NFL cut the length of all future drafts from 12 rounds to 8, and eventually 7. Here's to hoping that we never see a draft this bad again. Which NFL draft do you think was the worst of all time? Join us in the comment section below. If you like this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps us out a ton, and we appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, subscribing is a great idea because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.